And so, how did you end up studying geology when you arrived to the US?
Yeah, well, I was born in New York, and interestingly, my first language was German. I spoke no English until I was 6 years old, because that's all I heard around me. And then, when I started school, I had no choice but to learn English. And then, through the years, I did well in math, and I did well in science, and I went to a high school that specialized in sciences called Bronx High School of Science. And then from that point, I graduated, went to university, and my first year I did what most kids do with older brothers. I thought, oh, I should major in math. My brother did that. It seemed appropriate for me, but it wasn't fun. And just for fun, I kind of thought to myself, well, what is it you like to do? And I said, I love to be outdoors. I love the mountains. And so I decided, let me take a geology course and see what happens. And it was an amazing fit. I remember on the exams, I would get top scores and thinking, wow, this was too easy. And at that point, I realized this is where my passion was. And that's when I abandoned my math major and became a geology major. And so I got my undergraduate degree in, I guess it was January of 1970. And it was an interesting time because that was the middle of the Vietnam War. And I was planning to take a semester off before starting grad school in the fall of that year. So I graduated in January, and I get a phone call in the first week of January from one. I had applied to two universities. One was Ohio State, one was Syracuse University. I was accepted to both with an assistantship, teaching assistantship in both places, and I hadn't made a decision yet where to go. But I get this phone call in January saying, well, we just lost two of our graduate students to the draft. They were called up by the military, and they had two openings, and they were desperate for someone to fill those positions because they needed TAs. And so I said, well, I guess that's my decision then. I'll go to Syracuse. And started in February of 1970, and my area of specialization was glacial geology, which is not hardly at all related to what I do now. Although in fairness, it was I was quite interested in geomorphology, and of course did all the stratigraphy and sedimentology classes, and that was. And I graduated with a degree, PhD, and did my field work in Austria through a Fulbright fellowship, and it was in the Alps, so something that you can relate to. I knew I wanted to do something in Europe, and I knew that one of the funding vehicles was the Fulbright program. And I knew that I would have the best chance in a German-speaking country because I spoke German. So the first thing I did was I went to the library to see what topographic maps the library had. And I found one map sheet that looked interesting. And I zeroed in on one specific area to see if anyone had worked that area. And they hadn't. Which no one had really worked this area. So I did neoglaciation as well as quaternary glaciation, and employed a variety of different techniques, the usual stratigraphy and sedimentology, but also to age date moraines. I did lichenometry, and I applied dendrochronology to get a better handle on climate behavior and indirectly glacial behavior. So it was a very integrated study. It was, life is full of these quirky little occurrences that that lead you in a way that you never anticipated. And I never anticipated a career in the oil industry, never. It was the furthest thing from my mind. When I was in graduate school, occasionally recruiters would come through. And I remember one time nobody signed up. None of the grad students signed up because at that time in the East, oil was a four-letter word. Nobody went into the oil patch. That's dirty money. And our chairman actually bribed us to talk to the interviewer. He took us all out for beer and pizza, and afterwards, he said, if you go talk to him, we'll make it worth your while.
Is it still like this today?
No, it's changed. It's changed significantly. But in those days, it was just not. It was not something people thought about. And so when I arrived at Exxon, I joined Exxon Production Research, which I guess has changed its name since then. But they put me immediately into the seismic stratigraphy group, despite the fact I had never seen a seismic section before. But it was their philosophy, and I think the correct one, that in order to interpret seismic data, you have to be a stratigrapher. If you want to extract stratigraphic information, it was probably easier to teach a stratigrapher how to use geophysical tools than teaching a geophysicist all the nuances of stratigraphy. And it worked out well for me. I came at a very good time. Seismic stratigraphy had just been published in Memoir 26, and it was a very exciting time to gradually move and transfer what we applied to geophysical data to well logs and core, and really understand the mechanics of how stratigraphic architecture evolved. So I was the right place at the right time, and it worked out really well. And then seismic geomorphology came quite a bit later.